Imagine stepping back in time. The year is 1977, the air is thick with the scent of patchouli and, the thumping bass line of a Bee Gees track spilling from a nearby club. A young man stands near a bustling street corner, just watching the world go by. He isn't scrolling through a phone, swiping left or right on curated profiles. Instead, he's observing real life. A woman catches his eye. She isn't wearing layers of contouring makeup or sporting surgically enhanced features. Her hair, feathered and sun-kissed, moves freely as she walks. She wears high-waisted bell-bottom jeans and a simple peasant blouse, a look that speaks of comfort and a certain carefree spirit. He notices the way she carries herself, with a confidence that seems both new and exciting. This was attraction in the 1970s, a world away from our digital age. This scene was not just about fashion, it was a snapshot of a profound cultural shift. The polished, domestic ideals of the 1950s and the radical counterculture of the 1960s had given way to something new. The 1970s was a decade of transition, a messy, vibrant, and often contradictory period where old and new ideas about relationships, gender roles, and beauty collided. For men, this meant their perceptions of what made a woman attractive were also in flux. The docile housewife archetype was fading, but the fully empowered, career-driven woman was still a novel concept. Attraction was becoming a more complex equation, blending physical appeal with a woman's personality, her ambitions, and her unique spirit. It was a time of discovery for everyone. The 70s man was navigating a new landscape of femininity. He might find himself drawn to the earthy, natural woman one moment, and the glamorous, disco-dancing queen the next. The women he met were no longer defined solely by their marital prospects or homemaking skills. They were students, artists, activists, and increasingly professionals. This diversity meant that there was no single type that captured every man's heart. Instead, attraction became more individualized. A man might be captivated by a woman he met at a political rally, impressed by her passion and intellect, or he could be mesmerized by the woman at the disco whose joyful energy lit up the entire room. The rules were being rewritten, and the game of attraction was more interesting than ever. In this retro dive, we will explore the qualities that men found so compelling in the women of the 70s. It was a time when natural beauty reigned supreme, but it was also a time when a woman's inner world, her confidence, her independence, and her kindness began to shine just as brightly. We will look at how the seismic shifts in society, from the women's liberation movement to the hedonism of the disco era, sculpted a new image of the ideal woman. It was an image that was often contradictory, blending strength with softness and ambition with warmth. But what truly made a woman attractive was more than just her feathered hair or her flair for fashion. It was something deeper. The 1970s did not happen in a vacuum. They were the direct result of the social earthquakes of the preceding decade. The civil rights movement, the anti-war protests, and the sexual revolution had cracked the foundations of traditional society. For women, this era was defined by the second-wave feminist movement, which pushed issues like equal pay, reproductive rights, and workplace equality into the mainstream conversation. Suddenly, women were not just asking for a seat at the table, they were building their own. This profound change in women's roles had a ripple effect on the dynamics of attraction. Men were encountering women who had their own aspirations, careers, and bank accounts. This was a new and, for many, an incredibly appealing prospect. This societal transformation created a fascinating tension. On one hand, many men were still raised with the traditional expectations of the past. They were taught to be providers and protectors, and they expected women to be nurturing homemakers. Yet, the world around them was telling a different story. They saw women marching for their rights, enrolling in universities in record numbers, and entering professions once dominated by men. This created a sort of curiosity loop in the male psyche. They were intrigued by these new, independent women, a woman who could discuss politics, manage her own finances, or plan her own future was exciting and, honestly, a little bit intimidating. She was a partner in a way that previous generations had not experienced. The cultural landscape was also diversifying. Disco music, with its emphasis on glamour, dance, and liberation, offered a space where men and women could interact with a new sense of freedom. The disco floor was a great equalizer. It wasn't about your family background or your job title, it was about your energy, your confidence, and your ability to let go. Men were drawn to women who could command the dance floor, not as passive partners but as stars in their own right. Think of Diana Ross with her dazzling stage presence and powerful voice. She embodied a new kind of glamour that was bold, self-assured, and utterly captivating. Her appeal was not just in her beauty, but in her undeniable talent and star power. Simultaneously, the Back to Nature movement offered an alternative to the glitz of disco. This was the era of the earth shoe, herbal tea, and a renewed appreciation for simplicity. Men found themselves attracted to women who embodied this wholesome, grounded aesthetic. She was the woman you'd meet at a local farmer's market or a folk music festival. Her beauty was unadorned, and her appeal lay in her authenticity and her connection to the natural world. This duality, the disco queen versus the earth mother, shows that men weren't looking for just one thing. They were responding to the rich and varied tapestry of femininity that the 1970s had to offer. The aesthetic of the 1970s was a celebration of the natural. After the heavy artifice of the early 60s with its stiff beehive hairdos and thick eyeliner, the new look was all about ease and authenticity. Men were drawn to a beauty that seemed effortless. Women embraced their natural skin, often opting for a sun-kissed glow over a heavy foundation. Freckles were no longer something to be hidden, they were seen as charming. The emphasis was on health and vitality. A woman who looked like she spent her weekends hiking or doing yoga was immensely attractive. This wasn't about achieving an impossible standard of perfection, but about radiating an inner wellness that was beautiful in its own right. Hairstyles were perhaps the most iconic element of the 70s look. The Farrah Fawcett was more than just a haircut, it was a cultural phenomenon. The layers, the wings, the sheer volume, it all spoke of freedom and movement. When a woman with that hairstyle turned her head, her hair flowed with a life of its own. It was soft, touchable, and undeniably feminine. Men were mesmerized by it, but it wasn't the only style. There were also the long, straight, center-parted locks of the hippie movement, often adorned with a simple flower or a headband, or the glorious, powerful afro, which became a symbol of black pride and beauty. Each of these styles conveyed a message of confidence and self-acceptance. Fashion choices in the 1970s also reflected this blend of freedom and self-expression. Bell-bottom jeans, which hugged the hips and flared out dramatically, created a long, lean silhouette that men found very appealing. Paired with a simple t-shirt or a delicate peasant blouse, the look was casual, yet put together. The wrap dress, popularized by Diane von Furstenberg, was another game-changer. It was a garment that was both elegant and practical, accentuating a woman's curves without being restrictive. It was the perfect outfit for the new working woman, who needed to look professional at the office and chic at after-work drinks. These clothes allowed women to move, to breathe, and to be themselves. What all these elements, the natural makeup, the flowing hair, and the comfortable fashion, represented was a shift away from pleasing others and towards pleasing oneself. A woman's appearance became a form of personal expression, not just a tool for attracting a man. And ironically, this very self-possession was what men found so magnetic. A woman who dressed for herself exuded a confidence that was far more alluring than any meticulously crafted outfit designed solely for the male gaze. Her style told a story about who she was and what she valued. But as much as the look mattered, men were beginning to learn that the most attractive qualities couldn't be seen at a glance. Beyond the surface, the allure of a woman's mind really started to shine in the 1970s. While the visual appeal of the era's woman was, undeniable, something deeper was happening. For the first time on a mass scale, a woman's intelligence and ambition became a significant part of her allure. The women's liberation movement had encouraged women to pursue higher education and professional careers with this newfound vigor. A man might find himself in a university class, sitting next to a woman who not only kept up with him but actually challenged his ideas. This kind of intellectual sparring was new and honestly pretty exciting. It suggested a relationship built on mutual respect and shared interests, a partnership of minds as well as hearts. The woman reading a book in a quiet corner of a cafe became a symbol of this new attraction. This shift was a direct challenge to the old-fashioned idea that men should be smarter or more successful than their female partners. In the 70s, a growing number of men began to see a woman's ambition not as a threat, but as a turn-on. Imagine a young man meeting a woman who talks passionately about her plans to become a lawyer, a doctor, or a journalist. Her drive and determination were qualities he could really admire. This was a woman who had a purpose beyond just finding a husband. She had her own life, her own goals, and her own world. Being invited into that world felt like a privilege, not a given, and it made the entire courtship process more meaningful and engaging. The working woman became an increasingly common and attractive figure. She was no longer just a secretary waiting for marriage, she was a colleague, a boss, or even an entrepreneur. A man might see a woman confidently leading a meeting or skillfully handling a difficult client, and he'd be impressed by her competence and poise. This wasn't just about her earning potential, although the idea of a two-income household was definitely gaining traction. It was about seeing a woman in her element, thriving in a world that had long been closed off to her. Her independence was a sign of her strength and resilience, qualities that are honestly, universally attractive. Of course, this new reality wasn't without its complications. Some men felt insecure or confused by these powerful, ambitious women. They were caught between the traditional man they were raised to be and the modern man they were becoming. This created a fascinating dynamic, a kind of conflict in the dating world. A man might say he wanted an independent woman, but would he know how to handle it when her career required her to move to another city? This internal tug-of-war was a defining feature of the decade. Men were drawn to the new woman, but they were also still grappling with what it meant for their own identity and their role in a relationship. Confidence became, well, the ultimate accessory of the 1970s woman. It was the invisible force that animated her feathered hair and gave her bell-bottoms their swagger. But this wasn't the loud, aggressive confidence you sometimes see in caricatures. It was more of a quiet, steady self-assurance that came from within. It was the confidence of a woman who knew her own mind and wasn't afraid to speak it. She could voice her opinion on politics, art, or music without needing a man's approval. In a conversation, she'd hold a man's gaze, not out of defiance, but out of a genuine sense of equality. For a lot of men, this was a refreshing and deeply attractive change from the more demure women of previous generations. This newfound confidence was nurtured by the growing sense of independence among women. For the first time, it was becoming socially acceptable for a woman to live on her own, manage her own finances, and make her own life choices, all without the framework of marriage. A woman who had her own flat, her own car, and her own social circle wasn't seen as a spinster, but as a cosmopolitan and interesting individual. A man visiting her flat would see her taste reflected in the books on her shelf and the art on her walls. He was entering her world, and this made her more of a compelling, multidimensional person. Her independence signaled that she was with him by choice, not out of necessity. This independence showed up in everyday situations too. Think of a woman at a record shop, flipping through albums with purpose. She wasn't waiting for a man to guide her taste, she knew what she liked. Or, picture a woman traveling alone through Europe with a backpack, navigating foreign cities with a map and a sense of adventure. That kind of self-reliance was incredibly appealing. It showed she was capable, resourceful, and unafraid of the unknown. Men were drawn to this spirit as it promised a partner who would be an equal on life's journey, not just a passenger who needed constant direction and reassurance. The independent woman was a whole person before she even entered a relationship, but, it's important to balance this picture. While independence was highly prized, men weren't looking for cold, detached women. The allure of the independent woman was often magnified when it was paired with warmth and kindness. The most captivating woman was one who could be fiercely independent in her professional life but also loving and supportive in her personal life. She could negotiate a business deal in the morning and cook a meal with a partner in the evening, not out of duty, but out of a shared sense of partnership. This blend of strength and softness was kind of the holy grail for many men navigating these new rules of attraction. Beyond independence and intellect, men in the 1970s were also drawn to a woman's sense of fun and adventure. The decade, despite its economic and political troubles, really had this undercurrent of hedonism and a kind of live-for-the-moment attitude. Nowhere was this more obvious than on the disco floor. Disco was more than just music, it was a cultural space that celebrated freedom, glamour, and uninhibited joy. A woman who could lose herself in the music, who danced with a smile on her face and a genuine love for the moment was, well, pretty much irresistible. Her energy was infectious. She wasn't performing for anyone. She was simply having a good time, and that unself-conscious joy was incredibly attractive. This adventurous spirit extended way beyond the nightclub too. The 1970s was an era of increased global travel, and the idea of exploring the world became a shared aspiration. A woman who had traveled or who dreamed of traveling was seen as worldly and open-minded. She had stories to tell and a curiosity about life that was just contagious. A man could imagine backpacking through Asia with her or taking a road trip across America in a VW van. This shared desire for experience and adventure created a powerful bond. It suggested a relationship that would be dynamic and full of discovery, instead of settling into a predictable routine. And a sense of humor was also a highly valued trait. The ability to laugh, especially at oneself, was a sign of confidence and a relaxed attitude towards life. The 70s had its share of absurdity, from pet rocks to outlandish fashion. And a woman who could see the humor in it all was a joy to be around. She didn't take herself too seriously. She could trade witty banter, appreciate a clever joke, and find laughter in everyday situations. This lightheartedness was a welcome antidote to the seriousness of the political climate. A relationship with such a woman promised not just love and partnership, but also fun and laughter. Celebrities of the era often embodied this fun-loving spirit. Goldie Hawn, with her infectious giggle and bubbly personality on shows like Laugh-In, was beautiful, but her primary appeal was her comedic timing and her endless supply of charm and good cheer. She really represented the woman who was a blast to be around. Similarly, performers like Cher, with her bold fashion choices and witty television persona, projected an image of a woman who was unapologetically herself and having a great time doing it. These women were role models, showing that being fun, funny, and a little bit wild was actually a powerful form of attraction. For all the focus on the new, independent, and adventurous woman, some traditional qualities remained as attractive as ever. Kindness, warmth, and a nurturing spirit never went out of style. While men were intrigued by the high-powered career woman, they also wanted a partner who was compassionate and empathetic. The girl-next-door archetype, updated for the 70s, still held immense appeal. This was the woman who was approachable, genuine, and down-to-earth. She was the one you could have a real conversation with, who would listen to your problems, and who radiated a sense of warmth that made you feel at ease. This blend of modern independence and timeless kindness was often the most potent combination. But, this created a significant dilemma for both men and women. Men were often conflicted. They were intellectually drawn to the idea of an equal, independent partner, but emotionally they still craved the comfort and care associated with more traditional femininity. A man might admire a woman's courtroom prowess, but he also hoped she would be the one to offer a comforting hug at the end of a tough day. This wasn't necessarily a desire for a subservient partner, but a human need for emotional connection and support. The ideal woman, in the eyes of many 70s men, was a kind of superwoman who could do it all, succeed in her career, be an equal partner, and still provide a soft place to land. This clash between old and new expectations played out in countless small ways. For instance, a man might be proud that his girlfriend was earning her own money, but he might still feel an unspoken pressure to always be the one to pay for dinner. He might love her witty and assertive personality in public, but in private, he might wish she were a little less challenging. These subtle conflicts were the growing pains of a society in transition. Women, in turn, felt the pressure to be everything at once, strong but not threatening, ambitious but still nurturing, independent but not so much that she didn't need a man at all. Ultimately, the lessons from the 1970s are not just a nostalgic look back. They are a profound commentary on the evolution of attraction. The decade taught us that what we find attractive is deeply connected to the cultural currents of our time. It showed us that as society changes, so do our ideals of partnership. The 70s began the complex negotiation between independence and interdependence that we are still navigating today. It was the decade that proved that a woman's appeal lies not in conforming to a single ideal, but in the unique and often contradictory mix of her strength, her softness, her mind, her spirit, and her heart. If you look closely at today's dating world, you can still see the echoes of that 70s beat.